I have a confession to make. Two confessions, really, if you want to be out there with it. Number one, this is the second time that I'm recording this video. I shot this video about 5 days ago and then had to reshoot it because I spent 4 days contemplating whether or not my tone was too harsh in the first one. And I figured maybe not, maybe not harsh, but certainly not promoting literature, right? I was just a little bit too angry, I think. The number two confession I have, I'm sauced. I had to get a little bit um, beveraged up in order to convince myself to make this video. These are the pair of chapters that broke me. I'm kind of broken here. I don't know exactly. So I'm disappointed. I came to the realization that I have not read almost any Stephen King that he's written since certainly 2000. So that's 24 years right there. Most of the Stephen King that I've read was between 74 and 88. I realized I don't know much about Stephen King. That's 30 years. That's 30 years of Stephen King that I haven't read. That's a whole career of Stephen King that I don't think I've read much of. So what we have in this video is a So What Happened, a Lit Crit, and a Writer's Corner portion. This is the pair of chapters that broke me. So in this pair of chapters from Holly by Stephen King, what happened? The serial killer-ish couple that we have met, the interesting ones, the interesting pair of individuals in the kind of interesting. I mean, there's no Jack among us here. There's no Pennywise among us in this novel. There are none of the characters which Stephen King is able to write. Stephen King used to be great. They've picked up another victim, a woman named Ellen, and she is a Coco woman because Stephen King reverts to middle school love poems when writing about black women, I suppose. Um, she's also a vegetarian, so she refuses the liver, which is the sacrament. That is a big revelation here. The sacrament. We know a bit more about what we are doing, and this is the type of revelation that Stephen King is able to make using a simple word like sacrament in reference to the liver. Being refused means something to these people. Ellen also makes Emily mad, big mad, as the kids would say, and we have a bit of edgy kid language in this chapter, which we will get to in the Lit Crit portion. Also, Ellen recognizes the wood chipper for what it is and what it is she believes they're going to do with it. Also, she's obstinate. She's not going to eat that liver. She's not going to be a good sacrifice. So Rodney goes ahead and plugs her. Cut to Holly doing some detective work when she finds an earring, and she's suspicious that that earring belongs to Bonnie. So she confers with Bonnie's mother via text message. Bonnie's mother sends her a series of photos of Bonnie, and voila, that earring does belong to Bonnie. It did, anyway. Now it's Holly's finders keepers. Then Holly is afraid to talk to some teenagerish kind of boys, I guess. So she calls a friend to do it for her, like every strong protagonist would. At the end, one of the boys says, "You know who's worried? Stinky's mother is worried because she is a juicer." Now, this doesn't mean anything to me. I imagine this doesn't mean anything to you. But apparently it means something to Holly because she asks who Stinky is. But I don't care. Now, we're going to start the Lit Crit portion of this discussion with a quote from page 61. I shouldn't be this angry. This is still 150 times better than Fairy Tale, for which I have an entire series on the channel if you're interested, but also I have an entire playlist and series for The Shining on this channel. This book is 150 times worse than The Shining. So Stephen King is moving in the wrong direction, but we get this on page 61. Quote, Holly makes a sound that might indicate sympathy. She is sympathetic, but only to a point. It was a bad shooting, an indefensible shooting, no matter what the grand jury said. And she will never understand why cops, who snap on gloves as a matter of course before injecting ODs with naloxone, are against being vaccinated for COVID. Not all of them refuse the jab, of course, but a sizable minority do. In any case, she's used to this sort of grousing. Izzy Janes is basically an unhappy person. Doesn't this just... What is said here? What is said here? What are we communicating here? This is a bunch of almost statements couched in fear of your reader reacting to something you don't want them to react to. Holly makes a sound that might indicate sympathy. What is that? What is that, Stephen? She is sympathetic, but only to a point. So now we're talking about something that might indicate sympathy, and she's kind of not that emotion, but only sort of not that emotion, because she does sometimes have that emotion. It was a bad shooting. What are we talking about? What does the shooting have to do with Holly, the novel? An indefensible shooting. What do indefensible shootings have to do with Holly, the novel? No matter what the grand jury said. What did the grand jury say? We don't have that in the novel. None of it matters to this story. So this whole bit of... So, number one, the whole bit about the cops who put on gloves so that they don't touch someone who is ODing. You're comparing that to COVID. You're comparing an epidemic of drugs across this country to which you will overdose by making skin contact with COVID. I mean, plenty of people have a very bad time with COVID. The drug epidemic in this country, the drug epidemic that Stephen King is wishy-washy shoving aside here, is a drug that you will overdose from touching. That is terrifying. Healthy, young, fit people will overdose from making skin contact with this drug. Okay, so he wants to make that comparison. Fine, don't care. You want to make it, you want to make it. But these wishy-washy statements are being put forth to us by the guy who wrote about a clown preying on children, and those same children sharing a certain adult scene in the sewers. That's the type of stuff we used to get from this guy. This paragraph is written by the guy who wrote about a girl being so bullied by starting her cycle that she manifests witch-like abilities in order to slaughter her entire high school, is now giving us these wishy-washy statements. The guy who wrote about a doctor who was stranded on an island and forced to cannibalize himself is giving us these statements. The guy who wrote scenes of a man chasing his, what was Danny, like 8 years old? His like 8-year-old son with an axe, is giving us these couched statements. The king is dead. Stephen King is no more. I don't even know how to read this paragraph. And it's not just this paragraph. This paragraph was the best example of this type of writing that I have found thus far in this book. We're just afraid to make statements. We're afraid to really say things here. Which might have made me all too persnickety, because on 2 pages later, there are cigarette butts, an entire Tipperillo box, a rusty White Claw can, an ancient athletic sock. Now, I don't know, because I've never had a White Claw. Are White Claws sold in iron cans? Aluminum doesn't rust, does it? Am I wrong about that? Does aluminum rust? It will corrode, but maybe I'm just being too persnickety and picking things out. But then we have the latest example of Stephen King just not knowing how to write children, which happens on page 68 and 69, if I can find it here. They are asking, her and her friend shows up to ask these teenage boys questions because those teenage boys scare adult Holly for some reason. They're asking if they have ever seen Bonnie. I think I've seen her once or twice, the long hair says, and the boy sitting next to him nods. Just buzzing down Red Bank on her bike. Not lately, though. Wearing a helmet? Holly asks. Well, duh, the long hair says. It's the law. The cops can give you a ticket. The cops can give you a ticket. Edgy, man. Yeah. The cops can give you a ticket? Who cares? That's what these kids are preoccupied with, worrying about the cops giving them a ticket, really? Look, maybe that's snark. It doesn't come across as snark. The last thing that I want to say, and this is really something that sets me off in this. So we have here this couple who is abducting people. And they have abducted, the first person they abducted was an Hispanic man who was also gay. Now, she calls the Hispanic man a slur beginning with S for Hispanic people. It's a heavy word. Okay, but we get it. Then, well, the first thing she does is she calls him a gay slur in another language. Then later, we get her calling him the gay slur with the F word in English. Or the F word, the slur F word in English. Okay, another pair of heavy words. When they abduct, now, mind you, this is the character. This is the character. The character is the type of individual who uses that S word, who uses a gay slur in 2 languages. She's bilingual as far as slurring against gays. Okay, so that's the character. Then they abduct a black woman. Now, I'm just going to ask you outright, what word might this individual use against a black woman when she has already called an Hispanic man the S word and a gay man the F word? It's a word, by the way, Stephen King has used many, 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 many times. But we get this. Bitch, Emily thinks, and then what she would never in a billion years allow herself to say, except in her diary. stubborn, black bitch. That's the slur she would never say in a million years except in her diary. Black? Is Stephen King putting black on the same level as the F word and the S word? Or is Stephen King suddenly terrified to use that other word? The word that someone who calls Hispanic people the S word and gay people the F word would probably use to refer to Ellen. I'm not arguing that anyone should use that word. Stephen King has. Why then is the real question here? The real question couched in all of this. Stephen King is uncomfortable using a certain word. That certain word. The word to which every reader was believing he was alluding when he said, "Never in a billion years would she allow herself to say except in her diary." You imagine one word. Then he doesn't use it. Then he doesn't use it. Stephen King is uncomfortable using that word. Okay, you don't have to use that word. Fine, I get it. It's a very ugly word. It's a very uncomfortable word. Why then, Stephen, were you so comfortable using the S word? Why then, Stephen, were you so comfortable using the F word? You were not afraid of offending anyone with those words, were you, Stephen? Just a bit weird, isn't it? Now, the last point that I have here is a writer's corner point. Several times in Holly's chapter here, I can't remember where we're at, she uses this phrase, ooh. Someone offends her, and she says, ooh. Someone does something that of which she does not approve, and she says, ooh. O-O-U-G-H, I believe is how it is spelled. Here's the thing. We now, as readers, now the reason I put this down in the writer's corner section of this video, we now, as readers, know that this entire chapter was written in a single day, in a single sitting. How do we know that? It is marked in that way. Holly, to the best of my memory, before this chapter, never used that phrase, ooh. She uses it at least 3 times in this chapter. I would not be surprised if she goes on never to use that phrase again. Now, does that ruin anything? No. But in The Art of Fiction, I can't remember his name, John Gardner, in The Art of Fiction, says that what fiction is, when you're listening to or reading a story, what fiction is, at its heart and soul, is a vivid and continuous dream. The reader is put in the state of dream by the text. The writer's portion of this is to make it vivid and continuous. For this marking, this ooh word to pop up again and again and again in one chapter and not in others, breaks the continuous part, because it is stamping. It is stamping that portion of the book. It is stamping that portion of the story. It is stamping that portion of the vivid and continuous dream. Now, not necessarily the worst thing in the world. You can get by with that. It's sort of an effective marker if it remains in the book. It's not the worst sin in the world. It removes quite a bit of verisimilitude from the story. The vivid part can still be here. The writing itself is pretty good in the book as far as creating a visual for us. Stephen King still has that. Stephen King is still able to do the daily grind of the writing. I shouldn't be so angry. The problem with that marker being there is that it tells your reader you wrote that on a whim and didn't even care to edit it later. Now, it's possible, I have not read further in the book, it's possible that marker maintains or persists, I suppose I should say, with Holly. That she keeps doing that little marker. Ooh. And if she keeps using it, okay. If she does not, then it says that Stephen King never went back and edited it, because this stands out like a sore big toe. You ever had a sore big toe? You ever had an ingrown toenail? You kind of limp around on it. Every time you put your foot down, it hurts. That's what that marker becomes if Stephen King never goes through and smooths it back out. If every other chapter or so she doesn't throw in an we know Stephen King maybe got sauced, thought that was funny, put it in the chapter, and by the time he sat down to write the next day, he forgot about it. So, neither here nor there, not necessarily a big thing, just something to keep in mind as we are writing, that we have to keep that continuous part. The vivid thing, some readers will do that on their own. Some readers will take a very plain text and make it vivid. This is one of the tricks of Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway knew how to put pepper in just enough detail that your mind had to supply the rest of the details. Now, putting in just enough details worked for Hemingway. Stephen King is a guy who is a fan of his word count. Not necessarily the worst thing in the world. A lot of times, genre writers fall into that trope. Okay. Not necessarily maybe at the extent of what's the bad one? Oh, J.R.R. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings described every blade of grass. Who cares, Mr. Tolkien? Stephen King's not that bad. But the vivid part many readers will do on their own. The continuous part is absolutely 100% the writer's prerogative. The writer has to keep that continuous part there because the reader's not going to read this entire 500-page, 450-page novel in one setting. The reader has to trust you that the next time she sits down with this novel, it will be the same thing as the last time she sat down with this novel. That's the continuous part. That is all I have for this video. If you enjoy what I do here or appreciate what I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out on the channel, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, consider hitting the subscribe button in order to stick around for more. There are novel read-alongs, short story reviews, and poetry on the channel. I'm working on some special stuff for October, by the way. So October it will be here on the channel. So be sure you stick around for that, and I hope to have you back for the next one.